It's very important to see the budget, to understand the implications of the budget, to connect the budget with the impact on the stock market. So it's always very interesting to see the budget live, but you have to know how to see the budget, how to understand the budget, how to read the implications of the budget. So, check parallelly, see the budget announcements and the stock prices fluctuating. So it gives a very interesting perspective as to how the budget is impacting the markets, economy, prices, etc. directly. While you guys are going through the budget, also focus a little bit in terms of not exactly the oratory skills, I would say, but there's always a way in which you speak. So even last year budget or last year budget, they start with a theme, 4 things or 3 things, and they build up on it and then they categorize. So that is a pyramid approach that we follow. So we have 4 parts and the sub parts. So the flow, you need to understand as an audience, you need to really understand the flow in which you're going about with the entire discussion, right? So when you're looking at the numbers, you always have to make sense of how the numbers are. So I've gone through a lot of pitches and all that in the edtech space as well. And always we look at the number of people who are going to be graduating from the country. Everybody talks about the demographic dividend. But again, you have to be very, very good with numbers. So when you're looking at somebody who's analyzing one particular space, so let's say if you're analyzing and tracking fertilizers and pesticide stocks, so you would have to be very, very comfortable with those numbers. You can't think that I can Google everything, for example, where we want to use Google Maps for everything and not even bother about knowing which lane and how you can maneuver through the streets. But that is not going to be helping you develop your mind and your memory. So when you're working in a particular space, you need to be really very, very fast. I know AI is there, but it is not going to be able to replace your intelligence provided you're applying your intelligence. So I need to know the numbers in terms of, okay, this is the percentage, 140 crore population is there, this percentage of farmers, this is the amount of pesticide that was consumed last year. So whatever sector you are evaluating, you need to be living, breathing that sector. So that kind of knowledge, okay, how many students are graduating out of high school on a per annum basis? That kind of number, if you're working in the edtech space, you need to be having that. So when she says for 54 lakh people skill for XYZ, 54 lakh seem to be a very, very big number, but out of 140 crore people, it's not even barely 0.5%. So we need to understand from that context. So you can't just be listening to numbers without idea behind that number. So you have to always think from that perspective. So that's how you build. So when you want to be working, whether you're in an industry, whether you're a research analyst, whether you're in a startup space, whatever is your sector, your industry, you need to gain that expertise. You have to have hold of numbers. Numbers pay control is very, very important in whichever space you are and whichever profile you are. You again going to be studying the probabilities over here. What is the probability that this government is going to be coming back? So what is going to be the friction in terms of transition and all in case the government does not come back? So in the second term, that is 2019 election, that was a question and the global scenario again. But 2024 also, because the way the COVID debacle has been tackled, the way we are in terms of global platform and global forum, and the way we are looking at the civilizational aspect now. Today. So given all those things, external affairs minister and everybody, the way they're working around it, so you understand the probabilities of you actually coming to the government again and making term over here. So based on that, again, the interim budget becomes important because these guys are also relatively confident, I hope not overconfident, that they're going to be coming back again. So again, the probabilities come into picture. What is the probability? For example, the market, everybody talks about the market being overvalued. What is the probability the market is going to be going up from here? And what is the probability that the market could have a major correction? We don't know what is going to happen because, again, things are very, very different. Again, you need to understand the moment she addressed middle class, you need to start understanding the demographics again. So there are barely 3-4 crore people who are actually paying taxes out of 140 crore population. We're obviously trying to get more and more people into the tax fold. So when you raise the limit up to 7 lakh rupees, you do not have to pay taxes, etc. It becomes easier. And second is you again start understanding from the context of where US was 20 years or 30 years back and where it is today, where China was 10 years back and where it is today. So you start looking at how the proportion of, so when you're looking at those stacked bar graphs, what is the percentage of people who are in the affluent section, and then what is the percentage who are there in the upper middle class, lower middle class, poverty and abject poverty. So when you're looking at a developing nation, so you study history and you understand that how and how much of the proportion and which proportion becomes bigger. For example, we were discussing Zudio in one of the classes earlier, that these guys had a very brilliant concept in terms of no marketing, etc. that they're spending, but they're catering to the audience which is in the tier 2, tier 3 cities and the very, very cheap products which probably people are buying from the streets. That is the kind of price point at which you're trying to sell out over there. They've clocked a very, very good amount of sales. Startup idea also 1% or 1% of market if I get, I will be able to sell this much. But you have to understand 1% of 140 crore is not what you target, because 140 crore not having the purchasing power. So you start seeing segment that you're catering to and what segment is growing. The middle class segment is growing when you're looking at the country. This is very important because there was I think, decades when not a single prime minister of our country had visited the Northeast, which was fairly neglected. Now, when you're looking at the geo mapping, geographic indicators and all, if you've read about it, so you have, for example, the Lactodong turmeric. So that comes from the Meghalaya region. So when you're looking at the French economy, I had mentioned this also in one of the classes. So when you're looking at the French economy, for example, they do not want too much of urbanization to happen, as in people migrating from the rural areas to the urban population, because it's very difficult to build infra to that level. And especially when you're given the kind of population we have. You would see that there's a lot of wine industry, there's a lot of industry, tourism industry, which is more concentrated around the village area and the town area and everything. So as to propagate that economy also, where people are not supposed to be moving to the urban economy because they're well taken care of in those economy with respect to infrastructure. That is why building roads is such an important aspect for the government. So when you're looking at those things, you understand that these areas which are neglected, you can actually capitalize on it. So it's always very important to analyze the kind of numbers that the government had promised 2 years back, which is what she's referring to right now, 21, 22 numbers, and what have you been able to achieve. So even when we're looking at equity research, we always look at the budget that the management had provided, the guidance had provided in terms of the kind of numbers they're going to be achieving. In fact, the milestones also that the startup founders also provide when they're going ahead with the fundraise, and the numbers that they've actually achieved and why there was a gap between the same. So the variance analysis, that becomes very, very important also to understand whether the management is giving very aggressive estimates or conservative estimates, right? So even for the government, that is going to be important, because when we're looking at the debt to GDP ratio of Japan, for example, that has always been relatively on the higher side. Now, you cannot compare the debt to GDP of the country based on what it was earlier, because the kind of growth we are looking at, and if we want to have a hyper growth like what China had in terms of becoming the production hub of the world, and when all the companies and countries across the world are actually looking at India to be the number 2 option in terms of production, because they do not want to have that kind of a bottleneck with regards to the supply chain issues that we had faced during the COVID times. In fact, I was reading one of the books today, Same as Ever, and it was talking about a chapter where imperfection, a certain amount of imperfection is also important, where they said that, the kind of inventory systems and all we had was so efficient that the moment you need to assemble the product, just the moment before that, you'll be procuring the raw material in order to make it absolutely not glitch free, I would say, but there is no resource wastage. So your inventory management is so neck to neck that your efficiency is very, very high. But the problem is that a little bit of imperfection would have been good, because during the period in 2020-21, when the demand of automobiles was very high, the companies were not being able to produce it because they did not have the raw material in terms of semiconductor chips and quite a few other raw materials because of the supply chain inefficiency. So again, do not, be very selective when you people also absorb concepts or things from what you read, that okay, imperfection is important also and you need to have some time for yourself. So you'll only take care of that part from it and you will not copy the rest of it. So when you're looking at a number like this, be very careful. So she's saying the number of people who are filing taxes 2.4 times now, and the amount of taxes 3 times. So whether the 2.4 times that extra people, so 1.4 times extra people, one was already there now. So those extra people have contributed to the triple part, of those who are already paying taxes, they have contributed. It's just that extra 1.4 times people have been included in this part. So now what happens, a lot of companies, this government also, again, you have to understand, they'll do all those ESI and PF raids and all that. So you'll make it more and more stringent so that people come into the ESI, PF, because then they'll be able to show that numbers in terms of employment figure. So they also, it could be that these people are already employed, just that they were not a part of the numbers which the government publishes. So yes, they were not accounted for. So you also need to take that into consideration. So do not be naive when you're listening to any number. And that is the reason why I keep on telling you, talk to tax guys, talk to anybody and everybody, not crap nonsense and small talk and all, but understand what they're doing and see how things are connected. So ये सब चीज से ना channel checks करके करते equity research guys. What do you mean by that? Channel checks is basically you understand from the ground reality as to how the product is being there. कोई एक तुम छोटा ग्रोसरी का शॉप में जाओगे तो सामने में कौन सा सोप सजाया हुआ है शोकेस में और पीछे में कौन सा डाल के रखा है. सामने वाला will be one where he is going to get more incentives to sell or in terms of his commission and all that. So now how does a company like a Reliance Fresh and a Udaan and Avenue Supermart and all these companies, Geomart basically, how do these play a role into that picture? So how is the consumption pattern of people changing? Is the online shopping is what is becoming for anybody and everybody in the city only, or is it city and rural areas both? So you start understanding that ground reality.